is your red the same as my red, the same as Joel's red?
That's a good question. Well, I'll obviously have to start by saying that no one knows. Even people who have like studied this their whole lives don't know. And if they don't know, I definitely don't know. But I can give like some idea. It's tricky because what is turning there, obviously when it comes to like color perception, we can point to very physical mechanisms and processes that are going on, and they appear to be like very similar for everyone, unless you have like color blindness or other visual disorders. But this is the like hard problem of consciousness, is like how are we going to transcribe that information to the experience of a color? And is our red the same? I think so, and I don't have like good reasoning for that. It's kind of like a hunch, but something that makes me like slightly convinced is, and I know there are flaws in this logic, but just like how color invokes emotion in people and how those emotions can be universal. And I know there's like cultural upbringing, we're taught that red means stop, and it's because it's the same color as blood, just say. But as I said, it's just like a feeling I have that my red is the same as your red, because there would just be too many, like, if color was, it's completely different to each individual, the sheer like variation in color. So like I think a human can perceive 16.9 million different colors, including shade, like saturation, brightness, and hues. And if everyone had their own set of 16.9 million, like, it's possible, but like, wow, that's, impressive. I'd be surprised.
Yeah,
I think what this question points to is a larger discussion about sort of it's the difference between objectivity and subjectivity, and there is differences in those worlds. And Jacob's put on our notes here to expand that out, which I really like, is that when you move away from things that I would say are more objective, like a color, like visual perception, like those brain mechanisms that are universal in pretty much everybody, you move into something like describing an emotion or a sensation. The description of it, the language we use is the same, but are we pointing to the same feeling using that language? So Jacob used the word anxiety in our notes for this episode. Is your anxiety the same as my anxiety? Now, we might have written ways that patients have described, patients with anxiety disorders have described their physiological sensations or what kind of thoughts they have in that situation or how it affects their behavior. But do we really know we're pointing to the same thing? And is then, questions pop in my head is an anxious situation the same degree in different individuals? Well, my gut says no in that. We have sort of different levels of that. So that's where, to me, we create this separation then between, I don't know, a worldly thing like an event that creates a feeling and how we're describing it, or our perception. There's key differences there. And I think that's something that's interesting to explore. But I jumped in, Jacob, so you say what you were going to say.
I was just going to use, in a marketing context, that we all have the common thing of knowing that red connotes revenge or love or sex. It feels the same to us, or maybe it seems like it does, but the actual lens of what you're seeing, I think that's the unknown part. But I do think there is maybe a common ground of how this colour universally makes us feel a different way.
It's also funny that people always use red as the example, just like how we always use 7 when we pick a number between 1 and 10. Like, does that in itself say something? Like, why is red so punchy? Or like, maybe that adds to the concept.
Yeah, could you argue that it's maybe red is the most emotionally intense colour because it does connote danger and threat?
Yeah,
and those are the things that we respond to almost unconsciously.
I believe so, and something I quite like doing when talking about psychology and philosophy is bringing it back to evolution, because a personal opinion of mine, as much as I love like psychology and philosophy, is you can get very carried away into the abstract, and I think it's important to remember, like, we are animals at the end of the day, and our biology has evolved for function. So on that point, I think red, that is like, I think is a very good reason for red to be the most prominent color. As I mentioned before, like it's the color of blood. And if I had to guess, like, you know, and anxiety as well, is it's like, the reason we have anxiety is emotion to keep us alive so we don't die. Blood is red, blood is bad, blood is death and disease and injury, like important, like, you know, alarm bells ring when we see red. That's just like my idea. But yeah, so I've kind of forgotten like what was the last point said. But the point being was like, I think like by putting it into like an evolutionary framework of like, does red being a very prominent, strong emotional color check out in that framework? Like, yes, I think it makes sense to like consider it in that way.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that then we have then in our like quite modern separated culture from those like primal like evolution, where evolutionary psychology emerged in our sort of ancestors past, where we would, you know, we'd encounter threats and disease and blood and death and relate that to the color red and see that as like a threatening presence, that we then use it in things like traffic lights. Like, that is interesting to me that we still hold on to those same principles in the way that we organize society. And one thing, this kind of fits in to the categories of experiments that would never be able to be done, but the results seem interesting to me if it could ever be done. Is like, I was driving the other day and I was thinking about the brake lights on cars in front of me are always red. Now, if we could suddenly click our fingers and change all the brake lights on the back of cars to green, how many more rear-end collisions would we get? Because maybe there is a level like that. There are times, there's even a thing, I can't remember the right term for it, but a lot of driving, once you get to a certain point, is unconscious, right? So we see the car in front of us brake, we see the red light flash, and automatically we hit the brake. What would happen if that changed to green? Statistically, what would change about the number of collisions? It's just an interesting thought process. It can never be done,
I like to.
But it's interesting.
I like to think it wouldn't be that different because we're not so robotic. You know, it's like we don't function off just like one input equals like output. There's a multi-sensory experience. But maybe there would be like a correlation. I just hope humans are like, broadly speaking, just a bit more like conscious and aware at all times.
We don't like to think that it's that simple, that we would be swayed by something like that, and that everything's sort of very implicit.
I think
it'd be quite disappointing.
With what comes to mind for me is evolutionarily, like ripe fruit and the red of fruit was maybe a key source of food for us. And it's interesting we're talking about traffic lights, because then I'd go like, why are we so wired to green being like the tick, like the right to move? And also, just to like a side point, there was they did a thing in China, or I think it was China, about putting a time on the traffic lights when they did it when the cars on like I think when cars are supposed to stop, so a timer, and then when they were supposed to start driving off again. And I think when they were supposed to stop, that worked out better and there's less crashes, but when they were supposed to start up again, they all went zooming across and there's more crashes. But yeah, I'm interested on the colour green because I don't really know where that connotes to.
If I could, I'd think like it's important to also, and I'm sure you guys are like aware of this, is like also like getting carried away with like like it can be so fun to be like plants are green and plants are good and green is good, but then like, you know, at the end of the day, like we are so complex, and like distinguishing what is that like a natural behavior or instinctual response to like a cultural one is, you know, harder than like would think. And I recently did a video on color, and while I knew this, it was interesting just doing the research about how different cultures do categorize and perceive color. So like something I came across is that there are a lot of cultures around the world, more so indigenous cultures today, because sort of like Western like ideas have spread and whatnot, that blue and green are one thing and one broader category of color. And they also think this with a lot of ancient cultures. So it's like that to me intuitively is surprising, even in like an evolutionary context, because I'm just like, man, the sky's blue, the water's blue, trees and plants are green. Like, it's so different in my head, and you could think of reasons why we would distinguish them, but yet we just haven't. So yeah, really, to me, it is interesting. Like, the point is like, it can be so, with like psychology, evolutionary psychology, is it's, some people don't even want to call it a science, because you can't conduct science on it. You can't test it experimentally. Or maybe you could actually on like, but then there's like ethical implications and stuff goes haywire.
The problem is it's so easy to just think back to an imagined scenario of what our ancestors were living like and go, well, this makes sense because they were probably doing this. We have no idea. We are not in touch with those people. We can speculate based on historical records and our biology and evolution of other species and all this kind of thing, that these things have occurred. But ultimately, it's all theory. Like you say, you can't rigidly create an experiment on it with the same principles as other areas. But no, you're right. It's interesting. They didn't, so were they considering blue and green to be the same color? Like, they had the same name? That was just
from my understanding. Category. Yeah, it's more like a broader category. So I'm just trying to think. An example is like in English, we, if you look at a color spectrum of just like the pure light, we categorize light blues and dark blues together as just a broader family of blue. And like, while we obviously can distinguish between the two colors, like we still familiarize them as one thing of blue. And so what I've read is that with those lighter shades of blue, like the aqua and whatever, is they were actually more grouped with greens, and the darker blues were more grouped with purples, and that was sort of the distinction. Whereas we've kind of clumped the light blues and dark blues together.
Yeah. Interesting.
Didn't you do a video that was like, there was some cultures that didn't have the color blue?
Yeah. And one thing which I will like shamefully admit is that unfortunately on like the platform that I am trying to make videos on, is you kind of really got to sell something in the first 3 seconds. So yeah, I will often like pump up that first statement, like, is it true? Like, yeah, but I try and hopefully elaborate why it's not like they just didn't see it. It's what I was saying of their blue wasn't our blue. Their blue, half of it was in this family and half of it was in that family, and it's just what we call blue didn't exist for them. It was broken up into different things. But yeah.
I think a good topic to pivot on is the electromagnetic system or spectrum. And how we can only see a very small fraction of light. And I guess the questions I have about this are, what do we kind of do about that? Or is there a way that we can see more of the electromagnetic system, maybe on some sort of, like, for me, I feel like if you were to take psychedelics, maybe you'd see slightly more light and more kind of vibrations, and I know it's just a theory, but yeah, do you have any kind of thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, with psychedelics, like, it is known to like commonly increase color perception, but at the end of the day, like, we're limited to the wavelengths of light we can see by like mechanical restrictions that a drug can't really influence. But there have been people with diseases and maybe surgeries. I think Claude Monet, the artist, was able to see like frequencies into ultraviolet. So we're genetic organisms, and it's not perfect. It's not like every human has this exact set of like light that we can see. Some people might be a bit more and smaller and whatnot. But no, psychedelics don't increase that. They just change the perception, so that what's happening in the mind, but the eyes are limited to, like, they're physically restricted. But just on the topic of like, how do we see that? I also did a video on this, which was, I'd say, my first video that like kind of went well and maybe like believed that I can keep making videos, was on this very thing. And I saw a lot of people commenting oh, there must be like universes we can't see or realities we can't see in the 99.9 whatever percent of light that we're not seeing. We can't see it, but humans are so awesome. We see things with technology we've built, so we can see pretty much all the spectrums of light. So how we're doing this right now is that light waves are being exchanged between our computers, but we don't call it light because we can't see it. It's a radio wave, but radio waves are at the most fundamental level no different to light. So we're not even, it's not like we don't see it, but we're fully in control. We've harnessed the whole spectrum, right? Like we use X-rays, the same thing as light. Light is a very restrictive term. When we hear X-rays, ultraviolet, gamma rays, radio waves, microwaves, they're all the exact same thing at the most fundamental level, just different amount of energy stored within the light particle or a photon.
Yeah, that's an interesting addition to that line of thought that I haven't really been confronted with properly before. We know the function of the things we can't see, and we've been able to incorporate them into our world and use them, even though we can't see them, in inverted commas. And how do we know that we want to see them? I mean, to be honest with you, the world is pretty overwhelming and complex as it is from a visual perspective. There's so much to take in. In fact, you probably actually perceive a tiny fraction of what you see. We know that for a fact. When you navigate the world, you couldn't see everything that's there. There's just too much, even in that tiny percentage of the spectrum that we can actually observe. And you wouldn't want to be able to see everything. Your brain would be fried. So we've harnessed it. I like that a lot.
Sorry.
I was just going to say, what is that 99% that we're not seeing?
Well, you can just sort of think of it as half of it. So if you imagine light is a wave, and if you've heard of quantum mechanics, it's a lot more complicated than that. But that analogy is good enough for now. Light is a wave, and if you imagine, think of the shape of a wave, it has sort of peaks and troughs, and the distance between two peaks is what we call the wavelength. So when the peaks are really close together, it's a high wavelength of light, and it has higher energy. When the peaks are really far apart, and it's a really long wave, it's lower frequency. And so ones that have longer wavelengths are... I'll step back a bit. Imagine the whole spectrum, and somewhere roughly in the middle is the light we can see. Now, when light has a shorter wavelength, it's blue. When it has a longer wavelength, it's more red. But if it keeps getting longer, it goes into infrared. If it keeps getting even longer, it goes to microwaves. If it keeps getting even longer, it goes to radio waves. On the other side of the spectrum, shorter wavelength light is more bluish, then it goes to ultraviolet, then X-rays, gamma rays. That's what's on the other side of the spectrum, and as we were saying before, we just only need to see it a tiny little bit and distinguish it, but we have harnessed, control, we're very aware of what it is, how it all behaves and interacts, and the current world wouldn't be possible if we didn't know a lot about how light works, pretty much.
Yeah.
I do
I'd
think,
to... Go on, Jake. You go, Jake.
Sorry, we keep jumping into each other. I think the world is is complex as it is. I was going to ask, do you think there's maybe people with eye conditions that have a different perception on the electromagnetic system that can maybe see more or less?
Yeah, well, I mean, we know people can see less, and that's just what we will call color blindness. That's color blindness, is seeing less colors as opposed to more. I'm not totally sure, so I don't want to speak too much on it. I do have a memory that Claude Monet, the artist, did have a condition or a surgery that allowed him to see slightly more into the ultraviolet wavelengths. And from memory, I'll check this, but I think the eyeball itself might filter out some of it, but the retina itself is capable of perceiving some of these ultraviolet wavelengths. And so when that was removed, you could see slightly more light. But I need to check back on that. But as opposed to other examples of people seeing more light, I don't know. It'd be... it'd be crazy if it really did just like open up this whole set of colors that no human had ever seen before. That'd be cool. I'd love to experience that someday. But yeah.
If you don't mind, I'd love to pivot to this video that you did about interviewing 100-year-olds.
Yeah.
I'd love to know
you've done your research
and takeaways that you got from this experience and what we can derive from that.
Yeah. No, well, I'm glad you found that. That was something I did a while ago, but while Scribblemouth was more of just like a side passion project. Yeah, Hal, who's his name, he's great. Like, I think my biggest takeaway I got from interviewing Hal, but the reality is most of it is because I actually know him and I see him quite a lot. We play pool together and snooker, billiards in this hall, and it's up 3 flights of stairs, and he'll come in there once, maybe twice a week. He walks all the way up, and he'll be standing. We can play for hours. Like, he'll just be standing the whole time. He doesn't need to sit down. And so my biggest takeaway from Hal is just the like ability or the capacity for a human to sort of achieve health, like proper health. And he said, and I asked him, like, is there a secret? And he just said, like, I just eat well and I exercise, you know. And he probably got lucky with genetics. But his mind's really sharp because he reads every single day. He just reads every day. And so it's another like takeaway is we think of like bodily health because it's more like tangible. You can see bodily health. But brain health is also really important, and like just like a muscle can be exercised. But talking with Hal like was also interesting because he's a very smart person and a deep thinker. I was impressed with his strong sense of atheism and his like content in being able to die and being no afterlife, no reincarnation. It's just like, when I die, I die. I thought it was interesting. I tried to challenge him on those points just to, you know, be a bit of a devil's advocate. And he assumed that I was like religious for doing so, which I thought was funny, but maybe that's just like a change in cultural mindset towards these things. But yeah, I'm still impressed by him. I always talk about him to people because I think just like when you meet someone that old who's so put together physically and mentally, it's really amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a couple of questions on that. One being, you kind of touched on it with like his reading point and the sharpness of his mind, but how much do you think, let's say, mental resilience is like the foundation of all that? Because you need that to...
Sorry, you just cut out on that last 5 seconds.
Okay, no worries. I'm saying, do you think the foundation of what's got him to that great position at that age is like a level of mental resilience? Because to keep up with the healthy habits physically, you need that, but also to stay committed to reading and learning and understanding the world, you need that. And maybe equally linking to my second question I have, this idea of his philosophies or his lack thereof in terms of atheism, he needs a level of resilience to see that positively, because there's a contradiction in my mind where I go, maybe I would with having not learnt about this, I would think that people that have a view of afterlife would be more hopeful when it comes to that age and more accepting of their own death, whereas he turned atheism into a positive and accepting a sort of a level of stoicism in that. So yeah, is that the foundation of all this, his mental resilience and his mindset, do you think? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I'll just make a quick side point about mental resilience and longevity. Is I just read both of Stephen Hawking's books, and while everyone knows of Stephen Hawking, it was actually brilliant to like fully understand his story of how he got this disease, and he became the longest person in history, the longest person to live with that disease. And I believe that the reason he lived so long was because he had a will to live. He had these secrets to the universe locked inside of his mind that the spirit was like, I can't die. Like, I have to stay alive. And I believe there is some real like merit to that, keeping his body alive. So with Hal, like, I asked him, like I said, would you want to live together forever, or how long? And he's like, I'd live for 120 or 130. I'll live to 140 if I make to it, as long as I'm healthy and my mind is okay. But yeah, it is an interesting point. So firstly, it's like, yes, I believe that mental resilience and like will to live is crucial in living a long age. And we know this because, like, just say something like depression actually exhibits physical symptoms that you can see on people, and they don't live as long. But how that ties in with his like philosophy and atheism, I don't think it's as strange as it might seem. I think that we have all these like belief systems, religious ideas, philosophical ideas, which do have a big impact on our lifestyle and well-being and perspective on life. But I think at the end of the day, for him at least, and I like to think I'd be somewhat similar, is it just comes down to like the quality of my life. Like right now I'm happy and I want to keep living, and I hope when I get to his age, like I'm also thinking like life's still great, like I don't want to end it now. But then this concept of death is interesting, because when you die, like you can't even feel sad about that. So maybe that's influencing his like lack of fear of dying, is because it's like, well, why does it matter if I die? I'm dead. It's all about the people around me. So yeah, that's my opinion on like how you can stay very positive without a view of any sort of afterlife or soul or anything towards those years. Is just enjoying life. And he does. He still has hobbies, and he writes and he reads, and has family and community. So yeah.
This will to live idea is really interesting, because it's like, if I think that I'm going to die at 70, 80, I feel like there's something in it where I'm more likely to die at 70 or 80. And it's like if you speak to a cigarette smoker and you say, Orbez is not going to be good for you when you're older, when you're 80 and your heart's like really struggling, and they'd be like, I don't care, I'm 80, I'll be dead, so I don't care about, I'm gonna be old, it's gonna be boring, so I might as well live now. And I feel like there is something in this.
Yeah, I mean, totally. I think
question...
sorry, you go.
I just wanted to sort of add to that before you went again, because I think this is very true, and I was thinking about it while you're talking. And my question I guess I'd pose that you can springboard off from is, how would you define and try and characterize what you mean by will? The will to live. Is that a drive to wake up in the morning and do the things you do? Is it an enthusiasm for the things you do regularly? Is it a sense of purpose, or a higher purpose, a purpose bigger than ourselves? And that's not going into any religious thinking. That's just Stephen Hawking's example. He's got ideas that are bigger than him in the world of physics that he wants to explore and to express. How would you define will? Because it's very interesting, and if we can try and understand it, maybe we can try and build it.
Totally. I feel like I almost think about this every day, whether like very consciously or even subconsciously. It really informs my direction in life. I think at the base of my perspective centers around the fact that we are special, and I don't mean that out of an angle of like some sort of superiority complex. I mean from so many different perspectives. The Earth as a planet is special. The fact that life even exists at all is special, let alone that it evolved into intelligence and hyper-intelligence and self-awareness and self-consciousness and it's like, it's like when you look even like just say scientifically at this stuff, you get baffled by just how incredible it is. And you can even take a highly religious view and still come to the conclusion of like life is amazing. So for me, that's what I want and have at the crux of my perspective, is to never lose gratitude of like my own existence, and just the fact that like I was lucky enough to exist in the first place, and even more lucky enough to like grow up in a good family in a nice neighborhood and things like that. So for me, the will to live, I think, is structured firstly on your perspective about your place in the universe. So I think people who might not think about this stuff will lose a bit of a will to live. They might be seeking it. Maybe it might result in like short-term thinking, and just, you know, losing gratitude about like the good things you have in life. But yeah, so I've just like lost train of thought. But
I really like this, and I can jump in and tell a personal story, give you a moment to sort of retract that thought, because I really love that and I relate to it a lot. And I guess I approached it maybe from a different angle recently, but I think we're talking about the same thing. Where, for context, I'm an athlete. I play wheelchair basketball to quite a high level, and I play for the GB junior team, the GB under-23 team, and we went to a tournament in Brazil recently. And one of my things that I did to prep before each game, and specifically when we had like 25-30 seconds of our national anthem before each match, I'd remind myself of the same mantra, and the mantra was, remember the mystery. And I got that from a James Hollis book. He's a Jungian psychoanalyst. You might have heard of him. And it's this idea that you should keep in the front of your mind just how inexplainable everything going on is. That you know, and it is those similar points you talked about. The specialness of reality, the specialness of existence, and everything that's had to lead up to the point. Yeah, the absurdity. Everything that's had to lead up to the point where I am my 20-year-old self in 12-hour flight away from home, 4,500 miles away from home, playing a sport that I accidentally got good at because I started at 8 years old as like an insecure kid with a disability, to then being where I am now, like representing my country, playing at a high level, and that mindset did give me this will to play the game in a completely different way. It almost dropped the ego and went, it's not about how many points I score or like how I'm perceived in this match and what my stats are going to be like at the end of the game. It's like doing it for gratitude of the specialness and of the absurdity that I got there. So I think there is something to this for sure.
Yeah, and just quickly on the topic of ego is it often gets thrown around like ego this, ego that, but I think it ties into this spot about, for me, it really comes from looking up at just say the stars and the universe and understanding my place and the absurdity of it all. But the ego can get threatened by that because it reminds it of how small it is. And so I think for a lot of people, and on my channel, I actually get a lot of people texting me, like asking me for like therapy and stuff. And I kind of just have to leave it because it's just not my place. It's not something I don't want to like be the therapist of random people, but just talking about like, like, people have said to me, like, oh, it's so good to find someone, like, so depressed like you. And I'm like, what? Like, why am I depressed? Like, and anyway, a couple of people I've responded just being like, thanks for the kind words, but I'm not depressed. And they're like, but you're always thinking about and talking about the universe and how small we are. And I think that mindset of when people get sad and fearful of trying to expand their mind is the ego being a bit threatened by how small it feels. And this is something I've felt and do feel from time to time, that overwhelming nature of the universe and the absurdity of reality and our own existence, that is just like, I don't want to go here. Like, this is too weird because it kind of invalidates a lot of areas of my life. But the trade-off, if you can eventually, and hopefully one day I can eventually not allow my ego to possess that perspective, is like what you're saying is it's the opposite of depressing. You just like wake up and you're like, boom, like I'm alive, like this is great, I can do anything, and like I put my mind to, and isn't this like so special? Like just all of it, like you can just the freedom to go in so many areas and find enjoyment out of that. But if not to sort of ramble on or anything, but what's sort of an interesting topic about this that like maybe we could talk about is that life isn't fair. And so I'm aware that while everyone has like suffers through different things in life, I'm aware that I've generally speaking had a good life growing up. Like I haven't faced much trauma. I've had good family around me, financially secure, things like that. And I also am aware that may have influenced my perspective when it comes to like understanding the world and being happy. And so yeah, like I do wonder, is that perspective like accessible to everyone if you have had a really traumatic upbringing? Like, is it just impossible, or just really, really hard to attain such a positive mindset?
Yeah, it's scary, and it's unsettling, but it's such a good point. It's such a good point, and it has to be put as a caveat to all these conversations, because that unfairness, we don't know what to do about that. I don't know what to do about that. I don't know, like, that even the privileges to be able to think philosophically, that's a thing, because I kind of think of it in kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs manner. You can only contemplate who I am, the self, and like my place in the universe, and having a will to explore the world in an enthusiastic way and express ideas that are bigger than me. All of that's a privilege. I mean, I realized once when I was like, I want to say a year and a half ago, when I was in a weird, like, my mind was just in a weird place mentally, a sort of a crossroads in life and stuff. And I realized that the questions I was asking and the problems that I had were such privileged problems. And that once I hit that line, came into my head, they weren't really problems anymore. It wasn't, because I was like, real problems, struggling to eat in a war-torn country, in imminent danger, losing a loved one, like all these, the actual problems in life. That isn't what I'm experiencing. And the brain hangs on to things because it wants a problem to solve, and we've got this negativity bias that's always looking for, the thing that isn't sorted, the order that we haven't yet manifested. But if those things are more, I don't know, philosophical or psychological in this like conversation we've just had, then that's actually a fantastic place to be in, because you're so right that there is an unfairness, and it's not, I don't think it's a line of thought accessible to everyone, and out of powers that aren't always in their control. And what do we do about that? I don't know.
I've been thinking a lot about this idea, and it stemmed from the idea of Cain and Abel, the biblical story. And I'll just briefly explain that. So, Abel, I think, is a shepherd, and Cain, I think, is a farmer, and they both have to give sacrifices to God. And God doesn't accept Cain's sacrifice, so then Cain gets really bitter, and he basically gets resentful, and he ends up killing Abel because he's so jealous. To really summarize the story, and you hear a story like that, and I think it's pretty profound, because you can ask yourself, you're at this time of failure and of suffering. There's a lot of different things you can do. There's a lot of different paths you can take, and one of them would be the one that Cain did, and you get bitter and resentful, and you end up the spirit kind of possesses you, and you end up doing something you regret, or you can sort of break down and scream for it, which another character in the Bible, Job, that's what he did. Or you can learn to take responsibility and change. Now, that's really hard for someone that's been through trauma, but if I use a personal example for myself, I've been sort of continuously sort of failing and struggling through my entrepreneurial business pursuits, and it's almost cyclical, like it just sort of happens again and again. That's the nature of entrepreneurship. But I can't be angry at the world. I can't be bitter, because then I'll self-destruct, and the spirit, I just be in this constant state of anger, and people can spend so long just continually thinking about those thoughts. But I think what to me the solution is to not be individualistic about it, because that would connote some kind of blame, and I think the solution is the opposite of that, which is community. I think community to me would be the answer, and to get help and to give help. So yeah, that would be my answer.
You can also that kind of links onto what I was saying as well, though, Jake, that for you to be in a position to try something entrepreneurial and like try and create something that people might love, that in itself is a privileged problem to have. You have the freedom that you don't have to like struggle to the like absolute poverty degree. It's not like you have a family that you need to provide for and you're restricted in a line of work that you hate, or like, do you kind of get what I'm saying? Like, you're young and you have the energy and the time to try and do this stuff. It's almost like you're privileged for the opportunity to fail. And yes, like, I do also agree with the point you've made that there's like ultimately a mental approach to the obstacles that we face in life, and what differentiates people from the ones who let that stop them and block their path, and the ones that can overcome it and move forward. But also, I think it benefits us to come from that perspective that the ability to try at something you really want, ability to have a calling that's creative or that's philosophical, that in itself is part of the special absurdity of the lives that the three of us on this call are living. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a privilege, like, to pursue, like, yeah, to have the chance to, like, even do what you want, even if it doesn't work out. It's kind of like 4 steps ahead of most people on Earth, you know, to various degrees.
And one of the sort of things we talk about is a will, right? I think I want to ask, like, how do you build a strong will, or what does that kind of mean to you?
Yeah, will's definitely something I've fluctuated in life, but to varying degrees. Like, I'd say I'm actually quite a lazy person, and I have been since I was very young, and that, like, shows itself in not keeping a clean room, not looking after myself in certain ways, sometimes just wanting to lay down and watch YouTube when I shouldn't. So in areas like that, I lack will, but overall, I think I have a lot of it, and I'm just trying to think of, like, where it comes from or how it grows. It's hard to really pinpoint because, like, sometimes I think we always want, like, an answer and a step-by-step guide of, like, how things go one way. And, like, I know that my strong will is something I've kind of always had. And so, like, while there might be, like, genetic reasons, I know there's family reasons. I come from a family, like, all the women in my mum's side of the family are very strong-willed, you know, and it was always, like, you know, like, take it, grab the world by the balls. And, like, my grandma would, like, if I had an argument, like, my grandma would say to me, like, talk back to the teacher, you know, like, and so I might just be privileged in a sense of that I've always had an environment that's encouraged a strong will in that regard. But the same thing, though, is it's like, it is important to, like, exercise that will. So for me, that comes from making videos. That's, like, deep down what I want to do. And it took me years to, like, realize what I wanted to do with my life. It's the ultimate question. I think it's more ultimate than, like, well, you know, it's the meaning of life. Like, what is my meaning of life? It took me a long time to kind of come to terms with that, but I realized I've secretly known it all along, but didn't want to accept it. So I think, like, exercising that will is as important, if not probably more important, than having it in the first place. It's like people at school who are just so naturally talented at something but just never worked hard, and it's like blown, wasted opportunity and potential. Because, like, as we've been taught time and time again, it's like the ones that work harder, and this is something I have to be told because I can be lazy, is it's like working harder takes you farther than your natural talent or your starting point. So yeah, and just last point on will is I think it can be like a positive feedback loop, so that when you exercise that will and you see some results, it sort of excites you to keep exercising that will. But I guess it's important to just know, like, a direction that you want to take that will in the first place.
I looked at a bit of your work and things, and a lot of it is, like, a lot to do with sort of ways of interpreting and the trying to come to terms with interesting parts of reality and our biases and the way that our mind is wired to not see these things or to, like, find these things interesting. So I guess my question is, what are some of the things you've learned about the way the mind is biased in understanding the world? Does that kind of make sense in from what you've sort of researched and made videos about?
Yeah. totally. Like, I haven't thought about that question in particular, but I think I can give some ideas. Yeah, great question. I'd actually almost love to have like thought about that before, because that's a like really interesting way of putting it. I think one bias or cognitive like tendency we have is that we like to be small to some degree. As in, humans like the path of least resistance, and so it's easiest. It requires the less effort to go down the path of least resistance. And while that like actually ties into what we were just saying about like will and like what you do with your life, I think intellectually like challenging yourself is like rebelling against the path of least resistance. It's like constantly challenging, like what this podcast is called. Being open-minded is not an easy thing. So yeah, I think like I guess the biggest bias I think is that like people sort of formulate a worldview and they don't want to challenge it, and new information they learn, they'll kind of find a way to squeeze it in. So I think they just call that confirmation bias. And it's sort of, you see results and you'll try and make them fit your predetermined hypothesis or theory. But it doesn't even matter what the results are. I see this a lot, like when I talk about anything to do with just existence or space or something, and people will always like just make it religious and talk about like, I get a lot of people texting me just being like, you need to find God, like he's in you, and it's like I think if you really listen to like my meaning of when I talk about these topics, like I'm not religious, I like to be existential, and the idea of God is not a crazy concept, but like the religious aspects of it to me are like very human invented, and like I'm not so interested in that. I think I've just sort of rambled a bit, which is why I said it would like, it's a good question. I wish I like could have thought about it and had more of like a clear cut answer.
I think you did a decent job there. Like it's true that we have a rigidity in our belief system and our ability to like interpret and understand the world. And once we kind of get to a certainty, like a selection of philosophies and ways of thinking that allows us to feel like safe or relatively safe and stable, let's say, as a self, as an ego in the world, whatever that is, be that atheism, be that religion, be that some sort of political ideology. Like once we have a route and pathways of thinking that help us understand the world, we want to stay in those, and we don't want to move away. And like you say, there's this confirmation bias and there's cognitive dissonance, and these we don't want to add more in. We don't want to change. We want that path to stay secure, because once we seem to divert from the path, then we divert from the self we thought we were, and all those kind of our sources of self-esteem and understanding are then questioned, and that's terrifying. And that's why to a degree we have to be closed-minded to survive. I read part of an article yesterday actually, and I need to elaborate more on it, and I'll talk about it in another episode when it's more kind of refined in my brain. But what you were saying there made me think of it again, and it was an article about this lady coined this term compression culture, and said that all of our media is just trying to compress complex things, complex phenomena from the world into simple terms. Everything is served to you as simple, I guess. And I think this also runs through maybe perspectives people might have on your work and how you're trying to break this like compression idea, like understanding of the world and our place within it, and like wisdom is just kind of squashed into a headline or a simple way of explaining how life is. Like it's just God, or it's just nature, or it's no, this is the way that the world should be for this basic reason. And actually the answers to things are so much more complex than the way it's been compressed down, but we're training our brains to simplify and summarize every single thing, whereas you're then going like, no, look at the complexity, look at the absurdity, look at the amazing stuff going on that we just can't really fully understand. And that then, like I said, questions people's pathways of thinking, and our bias to those pathways makes it difficult for people to accept.
If I could just challenge it slightly though, I do think it's important to acknowledge that like humans are storytellers, and like back to the evolutionary thing, like this is actually an evolutionary like thing about us is like we are naturally storytellers. So to create models of reality is not a bad thing. But while they can oversimplify it, I think it's like it's natural for us to do that. And I appreciate the kind words. I like to think I do have to oversimplify like stuff just in the nature of my videos. I'd much rather make longer YouTube videos, but YouTube is a harder like world to break through, it seems. But yeah, I like to think I'm not dumbing the world down. yeah, right. It's tricky, you know, like YouTube doesn't, even I upload my shorts on YouTube and they'll go terribly, like even though that same short reel might go great on Instagram or something. It's crazy. If I could just quickly add one point before about, just because it came to mind and it felt really strong, about that cognitive bias thing and how I like to approach my perspective in the world, is actually taking a childlike perspective. And I think that's something we lose. And so just say an example, this just is like the first thing that came to mind, is like every day the sun sets and rises, and the adult brain, or like a fixed brain that's lost its curiosity, just accepts it, and it's like whatever, like it. But I think like when you look at children, everything is interesting. Like nothing is out of bounds of their curiosity and their enthusiasm and their interest. Like you can just give them a ball of yarn and they will figure out something to do with it. And I don't think that's actually like, that's not. It's something we lose but don't have to lose. And so, at least for myself, like how I try and approach my own videos is to get a concept and just try and think, what would a child think about this? And so it's like, children ask why, and the thing is, when you keep asking why, you get to these like extremely philosophical questions, even for the most like seemingly mundane things, like why is salt salty? I don't know, like ask why, and then you like find out that everything is a hallucination in your brain, and you're like, Jesus Christ, like that's crazy. Like just that childlike mindset, you know?
Yeah, I truly agree with that. It was something we actually talked about in me and Jacob's last episode of just me and him. This childlike way of approaching reality, one that is, I think being interested in life, or maybe a better word than interest is being enthusiastic about life, is a skill. It's a muscle you have to train, and it's like, can you try and experience everything to the same degree that a child does when it experiences it for this first time? Can you get an essence? There's an essence there. Like you said, there's an awe, there's a wonder, there's a priority of playfulness and exploration and discovery and enthusiasm that, like you say, we lose. And I think it can open life up. It can open life up, and like you say, this adult sort of computationalized perception of the world, where it's just like you wake up in the morning and everything's like it was, and you just go through your processes, and then you go to work, you earn your money, it becomes all very dead. We lose the aliveness that we once had as a child. Yeah, and it's kind of like the left hemisphere takes over with its sort of mechanisms and its functional view on reality, and the right hemisphere, the creative, more exploratory understanding of the world, just seems to atrophy.
Yeah, definitely. And I know we want to wrap up soon, but I just want to add a point of how I felt this was, so at university I did evolution and ecological science was what my Bachelor of Science was in. And I actually found it quite boring, to be honest, and I rarely make videos about that topic, but it's not inherently boring, but like the way it was taught was boring. This is what I want to talk about, is like what's always drawn me to biology is like how weird animals and life forms are. Somehow matter just like collected itself into things that are living and breathing and then become conscious. And that is crazy. And yet in my whole degree, there was never any philosophical approach to understanding like the science behind what we're looking at. It's very, as you said, rigid and cold. It's like, you know, there's I don't know, it just didn't have anything that just made me go like, wow. Not once, you know. And I thought it was such a shame. Just really didn't like, and you know, so even science, which we think of as like having that natural curiosity, can sometimes lose that and just be quite cold and, you know, make it very practical rather than curiosity driven.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Something's been killed. I mean, I study psychology, right? And I have gained more insight that's actually molded the way I think about the world and my own mind from doing this podcast, rather than my degree.
Yeah.
It's something in the sort of the institutionalization of the learning that it's become so I guess it's systemized. I mean, there's a quote from some professor, and I can't remember the name, but it's something like, somewhere along the lines, we killed education by teaching kids how to get good grades rather than teaching kids about the world. And that's what I feel like my degree has become. And even the aspects of psychology that we do learn, it is all the very, the term I use is very left hemisphere, like very scientific, objective, breaking down behavior into, right, how can we measure it, how can we monitor it, how can we control it? And to me, that's not what psychology is. You know, psychology is, maybe I'm just a bit old fashioned and I like it back when it was more philosophical, but I do agree with you. Something has died in how we're talking about the world.
And we don't. I used to be a teacher. I don't have a degree in teaching, but I've twice in my life been a science teacher through loopholes. And my most recent degree stint in teaching was in a public school or state school, I think, a government school, right? And so there was like a curriculum that had to be taught. Luckily, it was a primary school, so it was quite loose. But it made me think, like, you bring up the concept of like a black hole to a child, and a black hole, time travel, even Einstein's relativity. You bring up these concepts to children, and they are like, you just see it on their face. Even the kids who you think aren't smart and aren't curious, you explain a black hole, and they're just like, "Are you kidding me?" And I'm like, I literally said to the kids, I'm like, "I'm so sorry, but like, they think that you are only worthy of learning this when you get to year 11, year 12, sometimes even university." And I think it's such a shame, because you talk to children about, we have this approach with just say like science, is it's like teach them the boring basics and groundworks, and then they can build up an understanding of the more complex things. But it's like, just try explain the complex things to them. They actually get it. They don't understand the mathematics behind the Schwarzschild radius and all that. And it's like, but neither do I. But like, I have some basic understanding of how black holes work, and they can too, and they are obsessed. And then all of a sudden they start asking more questions. And I just think, yeah, what you're saying is like the whole standardization and approach we have to education is so sad. Like it really doesn't encourage curiosity at all. And like for me, like I might get people text me or ask me like, "Oh, where do you get your knowledge from?" Which I think is a bit silly question, because I can just Google anything. So I might not be that knowledgeable and run like the channel I have. But it didn't come from school. Like people ask, what did you study? Like, did you study physics or something? It's like, no, like I've just always been curious, and like I've always learnt so much more, just like how you've learnt more about psychology doing this podcast. I've always learnt more from just watching YouTube and documentaries and reading, like, because schools are good about teaching you social skills, but terrible when it comes to curiosity.
Yeah, it's annoying being told what to learn. It's nicer to sort of learn yourself, I find. I guess I wanted to kind of wrap this one up with the last sort of question. I wanted to... We shouldn't exist statistically. I'm sure you might know the number or something. I can't remember off the top of my head. But I wondered if you had any thoughts about that.
Yeah, this is actually my most controversial video, because... yes, like there's something called the anthropic principle, which is that despite how unlikely it is that I should be alive and that life exists and Earth exists and can host life, it's so unfathomably unlikely. But the anthropic principle says like, well, it had to happen because here we are to talk about it. And it's like, if it didn't happen, we wouldn't be here to talk about it. And so it actually kind of makes sense. I've always thought it's a slight cop-out, but it is actually, I think, also a very powerful point. And it's applied to, like, why does the universe exist at all? And it's like, well, it exists because, like, it does. And if it didn't, we wouldn't even, we wouldn't even be able to ask why it doesn't exist. Someone said there's an example Carl Sagan gave where it's just, like, a number plate drove past that said, like, X2LB1M. And he's like, oh my God, like, look at that number plate. That's crazy. And the guy's like, what about it? He's like, there's a 1 in a billion chance that it would be that number plate. And it's like, yeah, but it had to be one of them. So it's like it had to be something, and no matter what it was so unlikely for it to happen, but something had to come out the other side. And so that's sort of the explanation to us. But I just think, though, in response to that, it's like, while that is true, I can't wrap my head around why I was lucky enough to get that, right? Like, why is it me? Like, I just can't, doesn't make sense in my head. And so then that sometimes has made me think, like, well, is consciousness separate to the brain? And that it's like, it is actually more of like a cosmic or unified thing that my brain taps into, which creates the illusion that I am one thing that is conscious of that, when actually it could have been something else and there would have been a consciousness regardless. I don't think I've explained that super well, but yeah, I think I do think that question shouldn't be thrown out the window, like just because it had, like, someone had to be born. Sometimes I think about it, I'm like, I'm not that lucky. Like, I don't bet, but every time I put a bet on a game, I lose. It's like, you should bet against what I bet on, because I just always lose. Like, I'm so unlucky in that, like, regard. And I just can't believe that I just won this lottery of 1 in a 10 to the power of 150, like, chance of just existing. But even greater number than that, like, I just, you know, it just makes me think, like, while we don't know, there must be just something beyond it all. I don't know what it is. I don't even know if it's conscious entity or not. It might not be, but, like, there's just some forces acting beyond what we know about, like, reality. And is consciousness tied into it? Maybe. Maybe not, but it could be. And I think that is something, a mystery I'm happy pondering about and being somewhat, yeah, I just think we might not have an answer to it, but it always, like, fascinates me.
I think that's the mystery that we must always remember and keep in the front of our mind. And yeah, I love your curiosity. I love the way you question things. And I want to thank you for your time today for this conversation.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
If people want to find out a bit more about you, where should they go?
Well, you just look up Scribblemouth on Google or Instagram or TikTok, and you'll find my videos. They're usually just short form, but I want to try and make some longer form on YouTube, but I'm not really in that space yet. So yeah, that's where you find me. I think that's just it. This Instagram and TikTok is mostly where you'll find me.
Thank you very much, man. Thanks for everyone for listening.